Hello, everyone. Thank you for attending this event, Rise of Privacy Tech. We're very happy to have you here and happy that people are able to join this session. Today, our session is called Non-Compliant or Too Compliant, Common Mistakes in Privacy Tech Implementations. My name is Debbie Reynolds. I'm the founder, CEO, and Chief Data Privacy Officer of Debbie Reynolds Consulting. And I have two fabulous gents joining me today. I have Adam Connolly, who is a partner in the cybersecurity data privacy practice at Cooley LLP, based in San Francisco, and Bret Cohen, who is the partner, who is a partner in Hogan's Lavell's Privacy and Cybersecurity Group, based in Washington D.C. Hello.
Hi, everybody.
Hi, Debbie.
Yeah. Well, let me just set the stage a bit. So the privacy tech revolution, I would say, really started to boom around the time that GDPR went into enforcement around 2018. Obviously, there were players that were pretty smart that kind of started their development before that date. But since the GDPR came out in 2018, we've seen a lot more regulations coming out around the world, as well as we're seeing a lot of technology move into this space. So over the years, we've been able to kind of see the interplay of kind of technology and law, and we're seeing a lot of obviously organizations developing tools, but also organizations adopting tools. So part of what we're going to be talking about today is what we're seeing in the marketplace as a result of, the convergence of kind of these new regulations and also this new technology that's in these spaces. So let me turn to Bret first. So there's a big focus for privacy tech tools around cookies, right? And in particular, let me see. In particular, to comply with the European requirements, what are your thoughts about how companies are using these tools to manage compliance with privacy laws governing cookies?
So thanks, Debbie, for that. I'll tell you, a day doesn't go by in my practice where I'm not, maybe not a day, but where I don't get asked about who offers this, right? As soon as you give the discussion about what cookie requirements are in Europe, it's how do I do this? This seems really hard to build. Are there solutions out there? So this is a really good market. As you know, there's a number of privacy tech companies in this space, but it's also something that's really tricky and evolving. And so, and something, to the title of our presentation, where we see it often or sometimes implemented not in accordance with the latest guidance. So I'm going to walk through some of the core guidance in Europe, and then Adam's going to talk a little bit about California in the US. So in Europe, the cookie consent rules, and I sort of start from an assumption that we all know that to place cookies that are not essential for the operation of a website requires consent. This comes from a separate law in Europe than the GDPR called the e-privacy directive, which was the sort of the cookie rules or the rules related to embedded trackers or other information collected from from users' devices. It stemmed from this 2009 directive, and directives in Europe are laws or European-wide directives that require each of the member states to adopt their own law. So one of the key things about cookie requirements to recall is that each member state has a slightly different requirement and interprets it slightly differently. So this was passed in 2009 at the European-wide level. Around 2011 or so, member states implemented their laws and they started putting out guidance. And at the time, the guidance said, for most of the European member states, said, well, consent is required for cookies, but maybe we can allow implied consent, right? We can show a banner and continued use of the site comports with the consent requirements. Well, then the GDPR came along and very specifically defined consent to not allow implied consent. And since then, across Europe, and the laws all incorporated the GDPR's definition of consent. So now implied consent is not permissible. It has to be express consent. And I'm going to walk through pretty quickly the required elements of consent. Consent must be freely given, specific, informed, an unambiguous indication of the data subject's wishes, and easily withdrawn. And here are some places where the tech needs to align with what the interpretations are by the regulators. So consent needs to be freely given. And we think freely given, I agree to a privacy policy, I've given my consent. That's not the case in Europe. So when assessing whether consent is given, the GDPR says, and I've always enjoyed this passage, it says utmost account shall be taken of whether inter alia, among other things, the performance of a contract, including the provision of a service, is conditional on consent to the processing of personal data that is not necessary. So what does that mean in the context of cookies? It means that it needs to be a real choice for users and how it's been interpreted in terms of how you implement cookie tools. And this is sort of a controversial point, is whether consent to cookies can be made a non-essential cookies can be made a condition of using the site. So can we have a cookie wall that blocks access to the site until you agree to cookies? Well, many of the data protection authorities say no to this. So you have to offer a version where non-essential cookies can be dropped or can't be dropped. And importantly here, analytics cookies are considered under European laws to not be, or by the authorities to not be, essential to the functioning of the service. So you often have a question, or global companies have to ask, should I have to get affirmative consent for analytics cookies and potentially lose analytics if users don't consent, or do I try and geofence? Also on this freely given point, a number of European authorities have given guidance on this. I'm not going to go through all of them, but importantly, to a point I'll make in a few moments, the French Data Protection Authority has taken the position that any buttons that are placed to accept all cookies have to be accompanied by one that says reject all. Has to be equal, same formatting, can't be, a dark background to accept all and a clear background to reject all. Users have to be given similar choices in order for it to be freely given. The next criterion is that they have to be specific. So cookie consent has to be distinguishable from other matters. You can't just say, I broadly consent to a number of different types of data uses that include cookies. The sort of what's emerged is we consent to a linked cookie policy that's specific to cookies. The consent has to be informed. So what does that mean? Well, some authorities have said this needs to list specific cookies. And how do you do that? You have to, some of the authorities have said you need to have every specific cookie listed in your cookie policy. If you go to the Connolly's own website, they do this, and give users the ability to turn on and off individual cookies. Well, what happens if cookies are dynamically served? We're going through the sort of the GDPR compliance exercise. We have, we're trying to track what cookies are placed. You don't know often if they're dynamically served by third parties. So the next criterion, unambiguous indication of wishes, which means you can't say by continuing to use the site, you agree to cookies. And it has to be easily withdrawn. So there needs to be a durable and easily accessible opt-out mechanism. So what are some pain points? Don't drop non-essential cookies before getting consent. I've seen this happen all the time. It's got to be blocked by that cookie banner. And this is a real pain point, again, for global companies. Make sure that the consent mechanism and opt-outs actually work. Adam and I and Debbie were talking about this ahead of time. We've seen this happen multiple times. Needs to actually work. It goes without saying. I think for privacy tech companies, sometimes you'll leave the back-end implementation to your clients and customers. It might be something to work with them more closely on, since we've seen it happen quite a bit. And appropriately classify your cookies if we have these different categories that users are going to accept or reject. The last piece that I will talk about is the big news in this space. After many years of threats of enforcement and cookie sweeps done by the authorities, the CNIL, the French authority, at the beginning of this month or end of December, issued 2 enforcement actions against Google and Facebook, totaling 150 million euros in fines. This is just from the DPA itself, so it's not a ultimately court adopted decision, but the French authority took the position that while both companies offered a button to immediately accept cookies, there was no equivalent solution to allow the users to refuse, only after several clicks. So think of a common implementation you'd see: accept cookies or manage settings. You go into manage settings, and then you don't. That's where you decline cookies. They want it to be equivalent and prominent. The button to refuse cookies was located at the bottom of a second window and entitled "Accept Cookies." So that was something that they said it would confuse users, and that the mechanism was complex. This was a pretty serious penalty, which they justified by the profits of the companies. And they've also issued an injunction to fix within 3 months. Otherwise, they'll fine 100,000 euros per day. So this is something that is a big deal. The big deal, and is sort of sending shockwaves around. Folks are looking at their cookie implementations, so something you can help with. So I'll stop there and turn it over to Adam to talk for a moment about California and CCPA.
Yeah, thanks, Bret. So from a California perspective, we're all used to seeing cookie banners flying all over the place, right? And a lot of that comes from the GDPR requirements and companies who are subject to the GDPR trying to figure out how to comply with those. It seems like it's so pervasive now, the cookie banners, that I don't know about you, Bret and Debbie, but I've definitely noticed clients who just come to the discussion with the assumption that they need a cookie banner, and then it has to look like everyone else's cookie banner because everyone else is doing it, so it must be required. But from a California perspective, it just is not. The CCPA has a rule that if you're using cookies for interest-based advertising purposes, that allows an advertising partner to get personal information of a user who is in California, then that is a sale of personal information from which Californians have the right to opt out. You could argue that this issue was the thing that the CCPA was the most concerned with addressing, right? Is creating this right to opt out and giving Californians the ability to stop this. And the CCPA also has very specific rules about what you have to do on your website to make sure that Californians know that they have this right. And what the CCPA says is that on your homepage, you have to have a specific link that says, "Do not sell my personal information." And that link has to be prominent. And you'll see it all over the web now in the footer, right next to the terms of service and the privacy policy. That is what the CCPA requires. It doesn't go beyond that. It doesn't say you have to have a cookie banner. There are arguments that it can be prudent, or it can help you with your separate obligation to deliver a notice at collection. But my view is that it's just not required. And so when you're implementing a cookie banner for GDPR purposes or for purposes of some other law, and this is going to be more important as new laws come online in other regions, it's really essential to think about geo-targeting and geo-gating, right? Are we delivering the appropriate language, the appropriate notices and options to the right audience? In these first couple of years of privacy tech implementation and adoption, it's just kind of all over the place, and we haven't seen evolve to where the implementations are smart about geography. So that's just one thing that we see a lot of is sort of unnecessary cookie banner implementations that are designed for California purposes. And that's not to say that it's a bad idea to have a cookie banner, even though CCPA doesn't require it. In fact, there's some reasons that can be really helpful for addressing CCPA's requirements as it relates to children, which I'll discuss in a second. It's also, you could argue it's a best practice. It gives additional disclosure. That's great. And if you're using certain cookies that are arguably more invasive from a privacy perspective, it can actually help you defend claims that those cookies are violating U.S. privacy laws. So one example of this is litigation that has been increasing in California, as well as in Florida, alleging that session replay technologies. So these are technologies that allow a company to create a DVR style replay of a user session and recreate the mouse movements and keystrokes. Those use of those technologies without consent violates the Wiretap Act and various laws. And so it's certainly the case that if you've got a cookie banner that can help you establish a consent defense that the user agreed to these when they use the website. So if you're using the session replay technologies, that you should certainly be thinking about a cookie banner. But if you're not, and you're just looking at CCPA compliance, it's from my perspective not strictly required. And then there's lots of other permutations of kind of the wrong content going to the wrong place, right? So if you've got a cookie banner with GDPR language in it, discussions of the difference between strictly necessary cookies and analytics cookies and so forth, it's really not germane to the California audience, and we see that all the time. Or you've got a CCPA specific kind of cookie disclosure, and you're serving that to someone in Ohio. You're not required to do that. Ohio doesn't require that. The CCPA doesn't require that you use that. So you get the point, right? It's I think there's another step in the evolution of privacy tech use and design and implementation that's a little smarter about getting the right message, to the right place. So I suppose that's kind of the too compliant side of the ledger. I guess it's really more too much information maybe than too compliant. But sort of from a non-compliance perspective, yeah, I totally agree with Bret that a big problem is that the links just don't work. You're saying that a Californian can opt out of the sale of personal information by clicking here, and the link just doesn't work. And when it doesn't work, then you're just a sitting duck from an enforcement perspective in terms of making a promise to do something, and then there's no way for the user to do that. So that's a big problem. And yeah, I think a lot of this just comes from the haste with which these solutions are implemented. There's lots of offerings for get it in 5 days before the CCPA deadline. We've seen a lot of that, and but the consequence of that is that it doesn't get the same testing after implementation. It doesn't get QA/QC'd. Oftentimes, it's someone in the legal department with admin access to the tool that's doing it, and not the web people that are actually implementing the tool. And as a result, you see lots of breaks. So companies need to do more QA/QC. I think privacy tech companies as well have an incentive to help their customers catch these problems. They should probably be doing their own cookie sweeps and testing just as a courtesy to customers, because I wouldn't want to be the privacy tech tool that was used for a large enforcement action, even if it was the problem was on the customer side and it was an implementation issue. I still wouldn't want to be that privacy tech company. So I'd love to see more of that. So that's one thing. And then I think two other examples of kind of non-compliance worth noting are ones that the California AG cited in their enforcement case examples, which have been published on their website. You can go look at these. One deals with minors. So the CCPA says that if you're selling the personal information of Californians, right? And kind of prime example of that is you've got ad tech integrations on your site, and advertising partners are pulling data out of cookies. If you're doing that, and you've got children under 16 on the site, that you've got to get their opt-in consent to do that. Children, or for CCPA perspective, is anyone under 16. And you got to get their consent. If they're under 13, you got to get the parents' consent. This is a big shift from kind of common practice in the U.S. that's been driven for a long time by COPPA, where the concern is with children under 13, right? So suddenly we've got this requirement for children, 13 to 15, and companies have been in kind of a comfort zone where we've solved COPPA, we've got our age gate for COPPA, everyone under 13 is solved. But meanwhile, you've got the ad tech sending data out to advertising partners, and you've got an app that 13 to 15-year-olds are using. This is very common with games, right? Mobile games. That's your core audience. You've got the ad tech integration, but you're not getting opt-in consent. Maybe you got the age gating for under 13. Maybe you even have a proper opt-out, but that's not compliant. And in fact, your age gate for kids under 13 might be telling you that the users are 13, 14, 15. So you have actual knowledge from your age gate that you've got a 14-year-old, but you're not getting their opt-in consent. And this is exactly the fact pattern that the AG cited in one of the enforcement examples. This was a warning that the AG gave a gaming company that they were able to cure by implementing all the appropriate opt-in controls. But this is a massive non-compliance gap that we see that I wouldn't be surprised if it's the subject of one of the first significant penalties, given the priority regulators are placing on children's privacy issues. And then the other one the AG cited was the failure of the opt-out of sale mechanisms to address the global privacy control signal. So what is the global privacy control? So the CCPA regs say that a browser or browser extension based signal that the user wants to opt out of sale must be treated as a valid request to opt out of the sale of personal information. And Attorney General Becerra, when he was still in office, actually sent a tweet saying that one such solution, called the global privacy control, is a CCPA opt-out request that must be honored for CCPA purposes. If the specific control that he's referencing is actually called the global privacy control, you can read more about it at globalprivacycontrol.org. And so, one of the warnings that the AG sent was to a company whose whose privacy tech solution did not recognize the global privacy control. And increasingly, we've seen more of these solutions integrate with it. I think all the kind of, the market leaders in the space have now integrated with the global privacy control, but companies also have to make sure that their implementation is such that it's actually working.
And Adam, who was one of the leading advocates for the global privacy control? If you get where I'm going here.
One of the leading advocates. No, I don't get where you're going.
The current head of the CPPA.
Oh, right. Yeah. No, I mean, when the Attorney General issues guidance by tweet, specifically endorsing it, I think that tells you all you need to know about where the regulators in California are on it. And yeah, that's a great point. They're focused on it. They've told everyone that they're enforcing it. So it's kind of table stakes now for having an adequate cookie consent management solution, opt-out solution in California.
Yeah, and I'll just before we go to our next topic, we had a question about cookieless tracking systems. So we are going to start to see. We know many companies have been working on this for many years about kind of having a cookieless future. Right. Cookies really are sort of, in my mind, a mode of transportation. So a lot of the things that people consider harm that happens in kind of the digital age don't require cookies. So we're going to see a lot of back and forth about this, especially, the cookie litigation has a life of its own at this point. But in the meantime, there are a lot of advances happening that really don't require cookies, but then also this tracking may still be done or even done even more effectively in the future. So let me go to the next question. This is for Bret. Companies also use privacy tech tools to help manage their obligations to deal with data subject access requests. What are you seeing from companies trying to use privacy tech to process these requests?
I'm gonna let Adam grab this.
Oh, Adam, go ahead.
Yeah, no, thanks, Bret. So in terms of data subject requests, right? We've got a bunch of different privacy laws that all require companies to honor requests from individuals with rights under the law to exercise their privacy rights, right? To access data, to delete their data, in California to opt out of the sale of data, to correct data, right? And it's a common theme in all of these sort of post GDPR privacy laws, but they're different. The requirements are different. The mechanics of what you're supposed to say are different. The deadlines are different, and so one pattern is certainly that companies recognizing this will say, okay, we're just going to, we just want to roll this out globally. We don't have to think about the differences, and we're just going to figure out what the high bar is and roll that out globally. Which you can certainly do, but I like to remind companies that when they do that, they're availing lots of individuals of rights, and they're making promises to them that they're not required to do so, that they're not required to, and as a result, they're going to get a lot of inbound noise, and their customer support function is going to have to deal with it. And in many cases, since these are, this process is new to companies, dealing with these requests requires a lot of ad hoc work, a lot of cycling. I've spent more time than I care to admit, advising clients on the nuances of responding to these, and the cost can add up. So there's a real cost to it. A lot of the people sending these requests are they can be contentious. There can be a lot of back and forth, and sometimes they're litigious. So I think you need to be mindful of that, and I think it's easier than it may seem at first to, again, make sure that you're availing the right, if there's a set of rights that are required under one law, to avail just those individuals of the rights, right? Give Californians California privacy rights, and Europeans European privacy rights. And this isn't being done a lot. Companies in these flows, these data subject request flows, aren't filtering out users. So Ohioans get to submit California requests and so on. So you get the point. On the other side, in terms of where we're seeing compliance gaps, again, broken links are a big problem. And then there are a couple that the AG has cited in the enforcement examples. So one was an online pet adoption platform that required an authorized agent to get a notarized verification to invoke CCPA rights, and there are limits on how much you can do to authenticate the individual, and limits to when you can require notarization, and this one exceeded those limits. They cited lots of confusing disclosures around the sale of data, and then they made Californians who are trying to exercise their right to opt out of sales go to various third-party trade association tools to submit requests to opt out of cookies, right? So lots of the ad industry organizations have their own tools that will allow you to submit an opt-out request that will be honored by their membership. But what the California AG is saying is that's not adequate. You can't punt to a third-party trade association to manage these requests. You've got to manage it for the individual. And then another example was a company they described as a media conglomerate who required the users to submit multiple separate requests, opt-out of sale requests for each website in its portfolio, right? Rather than just making it easy and submit one opt-out request that would apply to all the various websites that the company was operating, they made them jump through all these different hoops. And I think the overall arching concern here of the AG is creating too many hurdles to exercise these rights, right? Or what are referred to are dark patterns. That if you're making the user jump through too many hoops, it's not going to pass muster. So very similar to what the Connolly is saying in terms of requiring users to go into settings and uncheck a bunch of toggles in order to do what should be as simple as, from the Connolly's perspective, is click a reject all button. The AG is thinking along the same lines. You've got to make it simple for users. And then this is a more technical point, but in terms of compliance gaps, we're just seeing lots of required language missing from the communications that go back and forth to requesters, right? So, in Europe, the regulators have provided very specific guidance on what you need to be saying to requesters when you acknowledge receipt of their request, when you actually give them the data they've requested or confirm that you've deleted the data. There are specific disclosures you're required to make in each of those communications. Same is true in California. So for example, when a request comes in, you have to acknowledge receipt within 10 business days. You have to explain how you're going to process the request. You have to describe your verification process. And those types of disclosures that are required are very often just missing from the comms, if the comms even come at all. So I think that's definitely an area where we could see some improvement.
Yeah, I mean, Adam and Debbie, I'm sure you had the same experience of, all right, so GDPR was 2018. We went through the exercise of developing GDPR compliant individual rights requests processes, and then CCPA came about, we got the AG guidance, and so then we got requests that were modify my existing GDPR process for CCPA. And as we went through that, it was not a trivial exercise, right? Because of everything that you just said, Adam. And so I think there's a real opportunity for someone in privacy tech to really master what's required in different circumstances, helping identify the location of particular users and routing them to the appropriate disclosures and process flows.
Yeah, I agree with that. We have a comment here, very interesting. Someone says they've seen organizations hand wave the regulatory point and just apply strictest levels across all users, regardless of jurisdiction. But all they did was transfer costs from engineering product into their operational teams, having to manage all the DSAR requests.
There's no question. I mean, the burden on support teams is real, and I have clients whose support teams give them a lot of flack for this, and it's a non-trivial effort. I mean, Bret, you're right. I mean, once you took that sort of that triage flow for dealing with a GDPR request and expand it to also address CCPA, you got this really kind of Byzantine flowchart. And it's a lot to ask of customer support. It's notable that the CCPA specifically requires companies to train folks with compliance responsibility on what the requirements are, right? So those support teams are required to get actual training on how to do that. And it's this is it's a very substantial new responsibility for support teams. So they're acclimating to that. But yeah, as part of this process, the griping from support about what is the work coming to them through legal, through engineering is real.
Yeah. One other pain point that just came to mind is you often get this from Europe, and they say, well, the GDPR is the toughest standard, so just do it GDPR and it'll be compliant. It's like, well, let me introduce you to the authorized agent rules under CCPA. And what you have to verify, what you don't. There's been an increase in sort of automated DSAR requests, and we could talk on an entire session about that and the burden that companies are facing there. So all lots of opportunities for privacy tech.
Excellent. So while less discussed than the externally visible flows we've been discussing, companies are also turning to privacy tech tools to help with privacy impact assessments, data privacy impact assessments, privacy by design analysis, and also creating various data inventories. So Bret, what's working well, what's not working well, what's compliant, what's not compliant, what's too compliant, in your experience as companies look to leverage privacy tools, tech tools in this context?
Yeah, that's a good question, Debbie. So I would break it into two sets of technologies. Let's first talk about the ones you brought up first, the sort of the privacy impact assessments, data protection impact assessments, privacy by design, which is now expressly an obligation under GDPR. It's always been the case under U.S. law, at least the position the FTC has taken. And so, how do you incorporate good privacy hygiene into your evaluation of new products and services? And in terms of compliant and non-compliant, in terms of, it's interesting. I've seen some of the solutions out there, and you can. One of the most difficult things is, in determining whether a project is okay from a privacy perspective. Privacy is very different than security. Security can be binary, right? Not us overgeneralizing, right? But it's, do you have this control in place or not? Privacy, it's have we balanced the rights of the individuals against what our notices say, what we're authorized to do, what consents we have. And that's not an easy question. So in doing these balancing tests that are now mandated by law, in designing importantly privacy tech that will help with that, the first piece of this is the gating decision. So how do we know if an assessment is needed? You don't want to overburden companies by saying every single new idea you come up with, we have to go through a full PIA, because that's not going to fly. So you have to figure out the right amount of friction, and from a privacy tech standpoint, how do you ask the right questions in order to get the right initiatives into the privacy assessment flow? And that's going to vary from company to company. And I think there's a lot of good options you can give up front, but you might need to tailor that to particular companies based on their culture. And I think helping them tailor that at the outset might, because I've seen some of our clients be overwhelmed at the number of choices that they have in this respect. I think that also, it applies to the actual assessment itself, right? So I've seen privacy or DPIA tech tools that offer about 1,000 choices of, what are the privacy risks here? What are the benefits? And you're creating something that users are going to have to apply easily. And sometimes, again, that can be overwhelming. So I think about it at the same time. You don't want to, if you're giving anything other than an empty box, right? Which you can also do for them to enter their own assessments. If you want to help with the options, I think of it as like Goldilocks and the Three Bears. Sometimes the assessment tools are too light. Sometimes they're too heavy. You just have to find the just right in the middle. And I think there's a really good sweet spot for those that do it the right way. The other thing that I see, and I'm sure Adam sees, and Debbie sees this also in sort of doing investigations and advocacy work on behalf of clients. When we go back and look at privacy assessments, you have to be able to reconstruct how the decision making went, and there can be very inconsistent entries by the company. That's really maybe not the tech provider's issue, but maybe if you can help your clients think through the right way to designing their questionnaires to get meaningful and consistent responses that you can then use to reconstruct the reasoning that went through the privacy impact decision. That's something that I see as a pain point for companies. Be careful, though, not to steer too much in favor of a particular outcome. And one last thing I'd mention on the PIA, DPIA privacy by design front is you want, and I've seen this in privacy tech tools, be careful thinking about how you can help your customers maintain the legal privilege when a privacy decision involves legal. So, I know in Europe, a DPIA is supposed to be producible to an authority, and you might have to design it for that purpose. But sometimes legal decisions get wrapped up in these assessments, and you might want to offer the flexibility for your customers to help consider their assessments to be privileged, or to maybe remind them that they may want to not include privileged advice within their impact assessments.
Well, we just have a few minutes left. I'd love for each of you all, maybe like for a minute or two, give some like parting advice. What would you tell to a privacy tech company or a designer about what they need to be thinking about as a parting word?
Yeah, what comes to mind for me, and Bret alluded to this, is just the real challenge here of keeping up with the pace of change, right? New laws are coming online all the time, right? So in less than a year's time, California law is going to dramatically expand when the CPRA takes effect. We've got the Virginia law, and then shortly after that, the Colorado law. I mean, it's not an easy task, and what we're doing is trying to help companies comply with these requirements. And so, inevitably, there's going to be gaps. There's going to be gaps in the technology. There's going to be gaps in the implementation. But I really think some kind of, I don't, really, I mentioned the cookie audit before, but just a little bit of additional effort to help companies be aware of misses in the implementation could go a long way. And then on the company side, it's important to just be aware that they don't solve the whole problem. There's sort of this idea that, oh, if I just buy this, then my problem is solved, and it's just not true. And we've tried to describe some of the examples of how specifically that's the case. So it really requires not just the QA/QC to make sure that it was implemented right, but doing the actual work of privacy compliance requires more than just buying something, and that's something that companies have to acclimate to.
What do you say, Bret?
Yeah, that's all really good advice. I think one of the things to keep in mind is that regardless of who purchases the solution, it's probably going to be given to somebody at the lower levels to implement in the company, and who may not be as familiar with the exact standards. And you obviously you can't be giving legal advice to your customers on this, but the more you can do to increase user friendliness without giving legal advice, and I realize that's like a needle to thread, I think would be helpful, because a lot of times where we come in, and there's lots of other folks who do implementations on the consulting side. I bought this tool and I thought it was going to help me with this, and I don't know how to use it. And they're not always getting the greatest customer support according to our clients. And so what I would say is investing more in that support, and making sure that the solutions are durable, in ways where they're happy at implementing it, and it's meeting their needs. I think is just like having some of that follow-up will really go a long way in my mind.
Yeah. And in order for these tools to be really useful to organizations, I think they need to really reframe the question or understand that they may not be asking the right question. So I think it's incumbent upon people who are making these tools to really tease that out to make sure they're solving the right problem. Because what I'm seeing a lot of times, companies, they buy a tool, they thought it was what they wanted, it doesn't really meet their need, and they're back in the marketplace in less than 3 years looking for something different or something to augment what they're using. So yeah. Well, thank you so much to Adam Connolly, Bret Cohen. I'm Debbie Reynolds. Happy that we were able to do this session, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Debbie. Take care, everybody.
Bye.